Dr. Anthony Fauci, but there is no... The mute button is on. We can't hear you. We can't hear you. How come the people in the comments section ain't saying shit? It looks like he realizes it now. So, yeah, basically this is like the Obamacare website rollout. For about 6 minutes, they were on mute and just talking, and here...
About therapeutics.
There he is!
In therapeutics...
Dr. Fauci?
Yes.
I believe your audio just came on, so if you could come back to the beginning, I've heard again.
Okay, so in other words, nobody heard anything from me. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay, well, I said a lot of...
Oh! He went out again.
of concern that Dr. Walensky mentioned. When you think in terms of therapeutics, you think in terms of therapeutics for advanced disease and therapeutics for early and moderate disease. But also buried in that is targeting the virus itself versus targeting the aberrant inflammatory responses that often are the source and the cause of the morbidities and mortalities that we see with this particular disease. So first, if you look at the therapeutics for moderate advanced disease, one of the ones that is shown clearly to be very efficacious is dexamethasone in people who are hospitalized, who are on ventilators or have high flow oxygen requirements. It is shown to significantly diminish the 28-day mortality. There have been a group of studies, such as baricitinib and remdesivir, which have received an emergency use authorization. Moving over to the left-hand part of the slide, there are a number of interventions that have been used for more early or moderate disease. For example, remdesivir, which is a direct antiviral, has received FDA approval, and a variety of monoclonal antibodies have also received emergency use authorization, as have convalescent plasma. Other antivirals, hyperimmune globulin, and things like anticoagulants are currently in clinical trial. One comment about things like monoclonal antibodies and convalescent plasma, since they are giving antibody to someone who would need a direct antiviral effect of the antibody, it is best to use it early before individuals actually have had the opportunity to progress. And that's what we're going to be seeing in the future, is an attempt to, as early as possible, get these interventions to the patients in their particular state, hopefully as outpatients, if we can logistically get that done. We can move on to the next slide, and that is vaccines. As many of you know now, the federal government has been involved either in the development of and or the facilitation of the testing of a number of vaccines that represent three separate platforms. Shown on this slide is what we all know is the extraordinary efficacious and safe results of the Moderna and the Pfizer-BioNTech product, with 94 to 95% efficacy and a good safety profile, both having received an EUA. What we're looking at closely now is others that you see on the slide, Janssen, AstraZeneca, and Novavax, which are in various states of trial. Of particular importance that you'll be hearing about likely within the next few days to a week are the results from the Janssen J&J trial. And the reason they're important, it relates to some of the things that Dr. Walensky said. And that is, it's a phase 3 trial with a different platform, a human adenovirus vector. But it is going to be looking at efficacy not only in the United States, but also in South Africa and in Brazil. So we will get a good feel from those, I hope, I believe we will. We'll let the data speak for itself. But what we will see was the relative efficacy against the wild type virus that is predominantly in the United States, as well as the South African isolate, which in fact is something that we will be able to get a feel for the efficacy there. So we'll have some comparative efficacy, which will inform us on where we would go if the eventuation occurs that we do have that particular lineage that would take seat itself in the United States. So let me move on to the last slide because that relates to what I said. Dr. Walensky gave you a good feel for the distribution of the various lineages, the 117, which is in the UK, the 351 South Africa, which I just mentioned, and the P1 in Brazil. She mentioned about the increased transmissibility and the likelihood of an increase actually in some lethality in the B117. The important question that people ask is what is the impact on both monoclonal antibodies and on the vaccine-induced antibodies related to the vaccines that we are currently distributing now. When you're looking at the 117, namely what we refer to as the UK variant, what we're seeing is a very slight, if at all, impact on vaccine-induced antibodies and very little impact on anything else. So we are covered with that. Things get a bit more problematic when you go to the 351, or what we're seeing as the dominant one in South Africa. Because in that regard, there is a moderate diminution, namely a multifold diminution in the in vitro neutralization by vaccine-induced antibodies. However, and this is an important however, it still is well within the cushion of protection. So you could diminish the vaccine-induced antibody efficacy by a few fold and still be well within the protective range of the vaccine. And that's the reason why you've seen announcements that actually the vaccines that we're using are still effective. However, given that as a fact now, we have to be concerned looking forward at what the further evolution of this might be. Now, I want to make one mention about the monoclonal antibodies because they are more seriously inhibited in the sense of impacting on their efficacy by this South African strain. That's the reason why there will be attempts to develop even other antibodies that might be able to avert this particular problem. So looking forward, what we plan to do in collaboration with the companies is to develop what we would call alternative or boosts that would use the same platform, but that would incorporate a particular immunogen that would address these particular variants. And for that reason, we will always want to be a step or two ahead of what might be a problem in the future. So I'll stop there now and hand it over to Andy Slavitt.
Thank you, Dr. Fauci. My audio on? Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Fauci, and also thank you, Dr. Walensky. The country is truly lucky to have the two of you leading the charge on both our nation's best scientists and our nation's best public health officials. I want to pick up where Drs. Walensky and Fauci left off, public health and science. I'm going to talk about another topic, which is execution of the plan to combat the COVID crisis. Namely, the strategy, the progress, and the challenges, openly and transparently. Now, to begin, I'd like to start with one of the core pillars of our plan, and that is the equitable healthcare access and outcomes for all Americans. So let me introduce Dr. Marcela Nunez-Smith, who is head of the Health Equity Task Force, to make some comments on where we stand as a country in the battle to make sure we get every American equitable access to the medical care and the vaccinations that they need.
Great. Thank you so much, Andy. And that's correct. You know, equity is absolutely a foundational component of our national plan. You know, there's a moral imperative.
So, Dr.